everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we're gonna have an interesting conversation about color blindness. Don't know what color blindness is yet? Well, don't worry, because you're not alone on that one. I didn't really know what it was either until I read an article by Race Bannon, whose name might be familiar to you because we've talked about him several times before on the channel. And in his article, he credits the creation of the term to none other than PubAmp of Watts, the safe word. And so this is very much a brand new term, but I figure in the kink community, you never know what the next RAC or SSC is going to be, and when I found out what color blindness was, I just thought, okay, we definitely need to have a conversation about this one. Now, before we get into discussing the article and adding on my own thoughts to it, I want to define what color blindness is. And there's not really a set definition for what counts as color blindness, but as far as I can tell, it is meant to describe a scenario where somebody acts blindly in a relationship in order to obtain a collar. Rather than it being the case that the collar works for the relationship works in order to serve the goal of getting to a collar. To make a vanilla analogy, it's somewhat similar to when you have people that are chasing after a marriage just to get to a wedding ring. Like, they want to have the big sparkly dress and the big venue and have a $50,000 budget and do all of that kind of showy public stuff, but they're not really concentrating so much on who they're marrying and doing it because it's this very deeply personal experience where they want to share the love of their relationship with a group of their friends and family. You know, it's when somebody is chasing after the rock, but they're not really focusing on, you know, the next forever of their life if they're going to be married for the rest of the time that they live. In both cases, it can be driven by the desire to have a big spectacle in order to be able to show off what they're able to obtain, or just to be able to feel like they belong and they're part of this exclusive club that not everyone gets to be a part of. But more on that later. Before we get into that, I want to talk about collars in the BDSM community, because Bannon does a good job of starting off the article by talking about the presence of collars in the BDSM community, both past and present. It's a great little historical look at collars as they've been in the scene for a long time, and also where we are currently at. So that way we have a bit of basis for comparison before we get into what I think is likely the more modern problem of collar blindness. And as a side note, if you're completely lost at this point and you're like, okay, wait, Evie, back up. What is a collar and why do people care about this so much? I will just give you a quick rundown. So a collar is a symbol used in a BDSM relationship, typically a longer term DS relationship, as a way of demonstrating a level of commitment, devotion, and achievement within that relationship. It's typically considered to be the wedding ring of BDSM things that you can do. It is very highly valued, and a lot of people are driven to be able to achieve this because it is seen as such a high status thing within the community and considered relatively hard to obtain. It's a little bit different from the types of collars that you would see that are just like bondage play collars or fashion collars, because they are typically fancier, more expensive, and either worn on a daily continual basis or way more often than just play collars, which are typically only worn during particular scenes. So that's basically what a collar is and why people are into it. I have other videos talking about collars in detail, and with all that being said, let's go ahead and talk about the article. Quote, "Nowadays, when you go to any of the various kink events, bars, or social or play gatherings, you'll often see many people wearing collars. Even while walking down any dense big urban center, especially with a high percentage of queer population, you'll probably see some people wearing collars. The use of collars within kink is at an all-time high, yet perhaps their meanings are more muddled than ever. By muddled, I don't necessarily mean that as a bad thing. The meanings and purposes behind collars seem to be changing with the times." He then goes on to say this, which is a very interesting historical note for those of us who find old guard leather fascinating and want to know more about the reality behind it. "Once upon a time, at least in the gay men's leather scene, collars were not a common sight. Occasionally, you would see a guy wearing a lock chain collar, and you figured the key was held by someone else and they were in some form of intense, dominant, submissive relationship. There were a few permutations of this concept, but generally, that's what you thought. Then he goes on to discuss some of the many meanings behind collars. He also talks about how the changing meaning of collars doesn't have to be a scary thing for the kink community. And I fully agree with that. I think we should be able to change and adapt as society at large changes and as our community itself changes. And not being able to change is how a scene dies off. Ask me how I know about that one. But in any case, there is one more section at the very end of this article that I want to read from and then springboard from that into a larger conversation. Yes, in certain kink networks, collars are seen by some as a sort of status symbol, much like when people thrust out their engagement or wedding ring fingers at parties for all to see to signal they're officially taken. I know not every engaged or married person does this. Some within kinky circles yearn for collars because they want to belong. They want to be seen as part of the inner sanctum of kinksters. They want to be viewed as someone worthy of being collared. And this is where I want to start to expand on a couple of thoughts because, and I don't think that Bannon thinks contrary to this, but I do want to point out, I don't think it's the case that these ideals happen in a total vacuum, in isolation. It's not that whenever you decide you want a DS relationship and that you want to try being a dom or a sub, you suddenly get a beam of light into your head that says, desire a collar. You now want a collar as the ultimate goal of your relationship. Like, that's not what happens. People have this ideal of wanting a collar so much because we do a lot, maybe not always intentionally, as a community to tell them they should think that way. And naturally, when you're getting fed all of those messages, you're gonna kind of go, okay, well then everyone seems to think collars are the bee's knees. I probably need to get one too. How do I get on that program? And so some of the ways that I see this happen in the community where we get this messaging is, I think, one, primarily, is we focus on collar DS relationships and talk about them like they are the pinnacle, the absolute biggest, best way to do BDSM. And I think that can happen because we try, and I try, to be very careful about saying, hey, this takes a long time and a lot of trust to get to, don't rush into it. And that can make it sound like it's a mountain peak you're supposed to summit, and that the reason why people do DS is to get to that point. And that the reason why anyone does DS, the reason why people are kinky in the first place sometimes, is to get to that point. And that if you don't want a collar, that's confusing and weird. And if you are going on a different path, then you are just a less serious, less devoted kinkster, and that wanting a collared relationship or having one somehow communicates or means that you are a more devoted, more serious, bigger, badder, more intense kinkster than anyone else, which is just simply not the case. That is definitely not true. The thing that should matter most shouldn't be getting a collar or not. It should be about having and making the types of relationships that make you the most fulfilled, that make you happy. And for some people, that is going to be a collar DS thing. And for other people, it's not going to be that. And it should all be fine. Now, also in my experience, I think one way that this happens is when you are looking at community organizers, again, in my experience, not all of them, but as a representative sample, you get organizers that are sort of like one of two flavors. You get like the super switchy switches, and you get the collared DS couple. And it's not that the collared DS couple is going around indoctrinating people and going, you know, the best way to be a real kinkster is to have what me and my old lady have. Like, that's not what most people are doing. I am sure there are some that preach and try to use their position of authority in the community to teach everyone to be the same thing they are. But even just by them being maybe the first people that somebody knows in the scene and having a certain way they do things and being that representative example, it might come across like, okay, well, they're in power, they're the authority, and this is what they have. So in order to be better and to be a good kinkster, I have to try to be more like them, which means getting a collar, because somehow getting a collar becomes associated with respect and being a good kinkster and being an organizer and having a position of authority. And even in the opposite direction, it can also be true that in some spaces, especially more monogamous leaning spaces, that solo submissives are not always treated very well. They're treated sort of with suspicion and like, ooh, you're gonna come over here and take my dom's attention, and they're not maybe treated as poorly as like brand new baby doms are, but a lot of people kind of get their hackles up and go, oh, well, you're not spoken for, and so you can't be trusted because you don't have anyone to mind you. As though solo subs are like a wild animal that have to be monitored closely to make sure they don't misbehave in public. Like, it's like, oh my gosh. Hopefully everyone involved is a consenting adult, so why is that necessary? But that's a whole other conversation. I also think this can happen in more sneaky, unexpected ways. Like, for example, in terms of education and presenters. When I was first coming up in the scene, it was pretty uncommon for there to be solo submissive presenters. Almost everyone was either a DS couple or a solo dom or top. Solo subs didn't really teach because they were seen as not being able to teach anything. And I think partially that's a bias towards subs and bottoms in general, but also because there's kind of that perceived lack of social proof because, again, you don't have a dom to speak for you. You aren't claimed. What could you possibly offer that is better or equal to people that do have this thing that you don't have? And there was a dearth of education around DS relationships from just the sub's perspective, or types of BDSM you can do as a solo submissive, or the journey of a solo sub, or just bottoming education in general was really not a thing. Luckily, I have seen this one change, and because we do have more openness around who is seen as worthy to be an educator and smart enough and good enough to do that, I think we are seeing more perspectives represented, and that means less people are going to feel like they have to do a certain thing in order to be a good, proper kinkster. So really, I think color blindness is a combination of two factors. You have the external pressure from the community in order to be and look like a certain thing, and then you also have the internal pressure of achieving a certain thing that you put on yourself. And those two things together can act in very powerful ways to push someone in a certain direction. But there's one more thing I want to focus on that I haven't really seen covered extensively in this conversation yet. And that would be, why is it bad to have color blindness? Yes, we can say it causes negative outcomes, but what are those negative outcomes? And if you think you might be going through color blindness, how can you recognize it? And how can you mitigate it in order to avert disaster? In terms of negative outcomes, I think the first thing that seems the most obvious is having a bad relationship. Or worse, staying in a bad relationship because you think you have to in order to maintain community support and connection. And this is a big issue, and not only do we pressure people to get collared in the first place, we make it very difficult for people to be uncollared. Like, we treat uncollared subs with the kind of suspicion, pity, and derision reserved for, like, 19th century divorcees. Like, it's very weird how uncollared subs get treated. Like, instead of being like, oh, how do you need support? What's going on? Let's talk about it. Oftentimes, the community reaction is, oh, what'd they do wrong? Like, how come they got uncollared? Like, the default assumption isn't that the DS wasn't working for both sides, or the dom messed something up or violated a limit. No, it's always the sub's fault, and they must have done something terribly wrong to force their poor dominant partner to uncollar them. How dare they? It's such a travesty for the dom. It's like, it always goes both ways. And also because oftentimes DS couples tend to couple with each other in friend groups, when you are uncollared, oftentimes you will also lose your social network and your support group and your connections, and that freaking sucks. So yeah, a lot of people feel pressured to stay in a relationship that's not working for them because they're gonna get blamed for it if it does end up falling apart, and they're gonna lose their connections that help them get through a breakup in the first place. And also, one big negative side effect is that you can talk yourself into being something that you're not. and then have a very difficult time trying to figure out what it is you actually are. Like, are you really into service, or did you only do it because you thought you had to do that? What about talking in the third person or using honorifics? It can be very difficult, especially after a long DS relationship, to work out what it is you really enjoyed doing and what you did because you thought you had to do it in order to get collared or stay collared. And not only can leaping into a relationship full of collar blindness make you blind to what you really want out of a relationship, it can also have even deeper implications. Like if you were in a longer term DS relationship and your dominant partner did any of the very typical behavior shaping things that people do in terms of rules and structure in a relationship, that can take a very long time to undo and recognize that that is what happened. Like literally, you can have a relationship where someone is shaping what you like, what you don't like, how you speak, how you dress, how you act, how you do your makeup and your hair, eye contact, everything from the very superficial outer stuff to very deep personal qualities. And it is a ride to have to sit and reflect and be like, wait, do I like this because I like it, or because my master told me I have to like it and so I learned to like it? Yeah, that's a really big thing to go through just to get a collar and then not really get anything out of it at the end of the experience. It can be so easy to lose your sense of self in a DS relationship on this level, especially if you were doubling down on what you were willing to commit to in order just to get collared. And also, I think something people wouldn't really expect to have happen, but definitely does, is when you go through this process of rushing into being collared and it doesn't end up working out, it can leave you really bitter to collars and DS relationships, and sometimes kink as a whole. I've gotten numerous comments from folks that are like, well, you know, I was collared once too, and I had a whole DS relationship, and we did this, that, and the other thing, and I never got anything out of it. It was just some guy barking orders at me. It was awful. I hated it. Any sub who says they're a sub and gets something out of it is delusional. No one could ever really like that. And to me, I hear that, and that just sounds like such a place of deep hurt and trust breaking, and I don't know, it just makes me feel really sad when I hear that. Like, oh my gosh, like what happened? Did you do that because you thought you had to do it, or because you wanted it and made a mistake? Like, what's going on there, buddy? Oh my gosh, that is just awful. So yeah, having a DS relationship based on something that you think you need to do is not a good way to go. And I haven't even talked about the fact that when you are totally collarblind and you're just running around trying to find any DS relationship just to get collared, you can end up with dangerous people. People that want to take advantage of you because you want a collar more than anything else. People that lie, misrepresent their experience level, and just can genuinely want to or not care about causing you harm because you are too busy looking at the collar you like on Etsy and not paying attention to the 10,000 red flags right in front of you. And I'm not going to go ahead and like relitigate red flags because I have so many videos on those. Please watch them if you don't know. And really, please pay attention to those red flags. If some daddy dom on Twitter is telling you, hey baby, I'd love to have you come over and spend the weekend in my lake house. I'm going to put a collar on you and yada yada. Just don't listen to that. It's not worth it. 9 times out of 10, if somebody is rushing to get to the good stuff, it's not worth it. It's about the journey, not the destination. And on that note, I also want to talk about when you think you might be experiencing color blindness. How can you recognize it? And how can you pull yourself out of it? How can you get out of the nastiness that color blindness can result in? And well, the cure is a big old truth pill, which can shatter your illusions about what having a DS relationship is like or wearing a collar is like, but ultimately I do think it is worth it. I think, number one, when you do this, you gotta think about what do you want from a DS relationship. When you think of your dream DS relationship, do you think about what collar you're gonna wear, and being collared, and the collaring ceremony, and how other people might perceive you if you could achieve that type of relationship? Or do you think more about the person you want to have a DS relationship with? Not a cardboard cutout of like a daddy dom or whatever, but like an actual person with different needs and interests and like a life history and stuff. And do you also think about other activities, or is it just like collars, collars, collars all day long? Do you spend a significant amount of time researching collars, like different types of collars, different brands of collars, the most expensive collars, stories about collaring ceremony ideas and vows and whatever else? Like, do you research collars more than anything else you have ever researched in BDSM? Because if that's you, that's probably a red flag for collar blindness. And when you see people wearing collars, do you feel envious of what you assume that they have? And or do you assume that that makes them a better kinkster than you? Do you think that having a collar will finally help you feel secured and loved in a relationship? Do you think it will fix your relationship problems, for that matter? Like, do you have thoughts like, if he would just collar me already, I wouldn't have to act out like this? That kind of thing. Or do you assume you're going to become a different submissive once you're collared? Like, you know, I'm not really into this whole service thing. I hate that I have to make his coffee every morning. I wish I could just make eye contact without having to ask for permission, but if I can just knuckle through it for another couple months and be really good and follow all the rules, I can finally get collared and get what I want out of it, and then magically everything's gonna fall into place and I'm gonna love being a submissive. Now, these are fairly hyperbolic examples of what you might experience, but I don't think they're that far off the mark. If you find yourself trying to use a collar as your reward at the end of going through something, and the going through something is having a DS relationship at all, that might mean it's not really working for you, and you need to reevaluate if what you really want is just wearing a collar or having a DS relationship. Now, if some of these examples, though hyperbolic they may be, if they sound like they reflect you, if you can see some hints of your own behavior or thought patterns in that, don't worry, we have ways to help you get through this. Number one is, don't assume that people are better than you or a better kinkster just because they are wearing a collar. When you have that thought pop up in your head of like, wow, they must be like really good at this or something like that, think instead, they are not better than me. We are all on our own journeys in kink, and what they have or could have is not better than what I have. It is just different. It might sound silly to say that to yourself in your head, but really, if you can replace those negative thoughts with a more accurate, better thought, it's going to help you change the way you approach DS and approach BDSM, and help you kind of unstick yourself from that ideal you're projecting onto other people. And along those lines, don't assume you know what somebody else's collar means. It might mean that they have a 24/7 DS relationship, but it might not. And if what you want to do is just wear a collar, wear the dang collar. I give you permission. This is like, imagine, like, okay, we're gonna just time out for a second here. I need to say this, like, you know how it's not necessarily a great idea to wait until marriage before you know, well, in the same vein, I don't think that if what you just want is to wear a collar, you should go through the whole rigmarole of an entire DS relationship you might not want to actually have. So if what you want to do is look cool in an outfit, or see how it feels, or use it as a practical tool during a scene, do that. Go ahead. I give you permission. You don't have to do everything else to get a collar if you don't want to. It's totally fine, I promise. You might have to deal with a few people that get upset when they find out you don't really have a dom, but that's kind of their problem for being judgmental and weird about it, not necessarily yours. Also, talk to other subs about what it's really like to get collared. Did it change anything? What did it change? How do you feel about it? Do you regret it? What would you do differently next time? Has it caused any problems, perhaps? You would be surprised what subs say to each other in private that they don't necessarily say out loud at a party. I highly recommend looking at things like submissive support groups or discussion groups if you want to have access to conversations like that, because they can be so helpful for reality checking when you want to make sure you know what you're getting into. And also, if you happen to be in a position where you're thinking, hey, I don't think this is really for me anymore, you can have support. You can have people that are going to back you up and help you get through that process. Also, keep your eyes on the actual prize, which is a compatible partner, a loving relationship, or just getting to have the kinky fun times you want to have if that's what you're going for. You don't have to have a DS relationship if that's not what you really want. You don't have to wear a collar if that's not what you really want. Don't tailor your entire kink experience over what you think other people need you to do in order to treat you as worthy or a full member of the kink scene. If all you want to do is tickle fights or ABDL or whatever, please go ahead and do that. I know, again, there's going to be people that are going to be judgmental and be like, well, you know, they're down here and I'm up here. But again, those people are ridiculous. You don't have to pay attention to their opinions because they don't matter. At least not any more than your own opinion about yourself should matter. It should be you focusing on you. What makes you happy? What you want to do, not what other people are telling you you should want to do, you know? And if you don't know what you want yet besides a collar, introspect. I know I say this all the time, but it does really help. If you don't know what you want yet, go into your little mind palace. Think to yourself what you like about BDSM. Picture what you think of in your head when you go, my ideal BDSM relationship. And I know your brain is likely going to be clouded with thoughts of collars, but if you can get through the cloud cover and get down to what is maybe a layer deeper than that, what do you think about? Is it being locked in a cage all day? Is it high protocol service? Is it being beaten black and blue? What do you actually think about? And with those thoughts, what in there is what you think you have to do as a stereotype, and what do you actually get joy out of? Try to just like isolate and focus on little teeny tiny parts here and there, and really be honest with yourself about what it is you like and don't like, and really separate what is stereotype versus what is personally driving you to do BDSM. I feel like I might be repeating myself here, but I think that's basically what I wanted to say about collar blindness. I would love to know your thoughts in a comment down below. Have you gone through collar blindness? What helped you get through it? What were the consequences? If there's anything that I missed in terms of warning signs for collar blindness or how to get out of it, please, again, let me know in a comment down below. If you did enjoy this and you're not already, please go ahead and subscribe, because I'm videos twice a week about all sorts of different kink and BDSM related subjects. And then finally, if you want to support what I do, the best you can do is a Patreon. A link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.